Masechet Yevamot, Daf Kaf Hey. We're going to be studying the next two Mishnayot today, which are about cases of suspicion, where we suspect that the person that a woman is going to marry may have been involved in her getting divorced from her first husband in the first place. For example, if he is one of the witnesses, or if he is a judge that who allowed her to leave her first husband, and then maybe he did that with ulterior motives in order to marry her. Okay, but right now we're dealing with a different suspicious case where a woman is suspected of committing adultery with another man. And the halacha is that even if she divorces her husband, she may not be with the adulterer. The adulterer can't benefit from it because by doing that, he is sustaining the rumors that were only rumors before. And now, if she goes and everybody thought that, oh, I think she's cheating on her husband with this guy, and then this guy goes and marries her, then everyone will say, oh, see, the rumors are true. And so therefore, that is not permitted. Okay, we saw a machloket. When does this apply? So if, let's say they do get married, then do we remove them or not? And Rav said we do not. We only remove them if there are in fact witnesses. This would be in the case where, if there's rumors that she committed adultery, and then and there are witnesses that she had, not only rumors, there are witnesses that she committed adultery, and then she married her adulterer. Then, if she does go ahead and get married anyway against the law, the Bet Din will remove her. So Rav is lenient and says only if there are witnesses to the original adultery, then we have to remove her. But if it was only a rumor, then we suggest that they do not get married. They're not allowed to get married. We don't want to sustain the rumor. But if they do already, then they can remain married. That was Rav. And then we saw the opinion of Rabbi. Rabbi is more stringent and said, even if there was only a rumor regarding her cheating on her husband with this man, even just a rumor, if she does get divorced and marries the adulterer, then we force them to divorce, even though it was only a rumor that she was committed adultery in the first place. Okay, so now we have a strange statement. Halacha follows both of them, and we ask, these two statements contradict each other because according to Rav, she only has to get divorced if there were witnesses. According to the B, she has to get divorced from the adulterer even if there were no witnesses, only a rumor. So how could you say both? La kashya ha bekala de pasek, ha bekala de la pasek. No, it's different. It depends on the strength of the rumor. Kala de la pasek veleka aidim kerebi. Kala de pasek rika aidim kerav. If the rumor remains strong and doesn't stop, then even if there are no witnesses, we will force them to separate. And that follows Rabbi, who says even just with a rumor, it would have to be a strong rumor. At the same time, in addition, if it's a rumor, even if it's a rumor that stops, but there are edim, then we also force them to separate, to divorce, and that is Rav, right? It could be that edim saw it, but maybe they kept it quiet and they went straight to Bet Din. There's no need to tell other people about it. Well, it could be that there's no rumor, but there are witnesses, then for sure that goes to court and the court would separate them. And that's why we say halacha is like both. In fact, we're going to apply it either way, either witnesses or a strong rumor. Okay, what does that mean, a strong rumor? A rumor that doesn't stop. Kala de la pasek ad kama. How long does it have to not stop in order to be considered a reliable rumor? So Abaye quotes his mother, it's actually his stepmother who brought him up, who said that the length of time is a day and a half. That's the news cycle back then. It seems pretty quick, but if it continues for a day and a half, I guess the small villages and everybody knows everything. And so if it continues not just today, but into tomorrow, then probably some truth about it. But there's some limitations. But that's only true if it's a day and a half continuously. If it's, on the other hand, stops in the middle, let's say the rumor goes on for a day, and then it dies down for a day, and then picks up again for another day, even though altogether the rumor was spreading for 2 days, but there was a break in the middle, then that is not considered a reliable rumor. And then in that case, they would not have to separate based on it. And now this is a stringency to what we just said, which is that we only consider something to have a rumor to have stopped in the middle if it did not stop because of fear. But if it's not because of fear, in other words, let's say it's a governor or a powerful person who says, anyone who repeats this rumor, I'm going to put them in jail. And so everybody's quiet about the rumor. Then we assume, oh, everybody's just quiet about the rumor because they're afraid of repeating it and getting in trouble. So therefore, in that case, even if it dies down, we consider it as if it's continuous. But if there's no fear factor and it dies down by itself, then that does break the rumor and make it weak. And this is only said when this person has no enemies. But if the person has enemies, political, business enemies, they're probably just making things up, right? There's always people that are trying to disgrace others if they have enemies. Then we can assume that it's the enemies that are keeping this rumor going, and it's not a true rumor. And so therefore, these are good guidelines to trying to adjudicate. When there is a rumor, it could be something, it could be nothing. And so we take into account all of these factors to decide whether it's a reliable rumor or not. And if it is a reliable rumor, then this woman who has rumor to commit adultery and marries the adulterer, we make them separate. Otherwise, not. Good. Tenan hatam. And now we quote a Mishnah in Masechet Gitin. If someone divorces his wife because of a bad rumor, right? There's a reputation, and he's like, I don't know if it's true or not, but I don't want to deal with it. And he separates, he divorces his wife. He can do that, except that then he cannot take her back. Perhaps because you just separated from her because you assumed the rumors were true. So if you think the rumors are true, then what are you doing taking her back? If the rumors are true that she committed adultery, then you can't take her back. So, make up your mind. So this doesn't look right. You have to decide and then once you decide, you cannot change your mind. Also, if she makes a vow, and says, I'm not cooking for you. I'm not, I refuse to have any benefit from you. Some vow that he can't live with. And a husband does have a right to undo the vow, but only within a day. So he doesn't do it within a day. And the vow sticks and he says, I don't want to live like this. And so he divorces her. That's okay. He can divorce her, but then he cannot take her back. Okay, Gemara there discusses further the reason for the second law, but we're focusing on the first law. Shalach le bar Huna le Rabba bar Rav Nachman yelamedenu Rabenu kanas mahu sheyosi. In the case where a man divorced his wife because of either of these reasons, and then it says you're not supposed to take her back. Let's say he did take her back anyway. Will the court force him to divorce her a second time? That's the question. Amar le tanena hanit ana leshet ish v'otzi amitachat yado af al pi shekanas yosi. And his answer is, we have it right there in the Mishnah in Yevamot, our Mishnah, that says if there's a suspicion regarding adultery, and then the v'otzi amitachat yado, and he divorced her. Even if divorced her, even if the adulterer married her, we do force him to separate, right? So there you go. This is a similar case. It's not exactly the same case because in Gitin, it's the first main husband divorcing her and taking her back. In this case, it's the adulterer marrying her and then being forced to divorce her. But nevertheless, he says that's the same thing, so it's the same law. Yes, in fact, if he does take her back, we force him to divorce her. That's his answer. Amar le midame hatam hotziuha v'hacha hotziah. He says, hold on, it's different. In the Mishnah, it says hatam. Hatam refers to Yevamot. This is strange because we're in Masechet Yevamot, right? So usually when you're in Masechet Yevamot, our Mishnah should be hacha, and the one in Gitin should be hatam. But here it's the opposite. What seems to have happened here is that this entire sugya actually comes from Gitin. Gitin is the original source of this discussion, and that's why in Gitin is hacha and Yevamot is hatam, and this was transferred to Yevamot without changing the words, the pronouns. Okay, this happens very often in Talmud Yerushalmi that sugyot are transferred without changing hatam and hacha. It happens rarely in Bavli, but this here is one example of it. Okay, so anyway, hatam, meaning in our Mishnah Yevamot, it says hotziuha, which we already said yesterday means that the court forces her to be removed because it has witnesses, and that's why it's a more serious case. That if he marries her, we force them to divorce. Hacha hotzia, but in Mishnah Gitin it says he decided. The husband divorced his wife because he didn't like the rumors, and so therefore this would be a less stringent case where there are not witnesses, and so it's not necessarily the same law. And Rabba Nachman answers, oh, in my version of the Mishnah, I have Hosea also in our Mishnah in Gitin, and so in fact it is the same, similar case, and you can compare them. They're both when there was the court was not involved. It was not about absolute witnesses. Okay, still we have a question. Hacha Baal v'hatam Bo'el. In our Mishnah, in the Mishnah in Gitin, we're talking about the husband who suspected her, divorced her, and took her back against the law. Whereas in the Mishnah in Yevamot, we're talking about the Bo'el, the adulterer, who marries the woman, the suspected wife, and then we say, oh, but this is you were suspected of being together while she was married, and so you have to separate. So we're talking about two different people. And the answer is, so what? So they, yes, I'm comparing two different people, but it's the same principle. Just like regarding the Mishnah of suspected of adultery, hacha now is Yevamot. The rabbi said he may not marry her, the adulterer may not marry her, and if he does, he has to divorce. So too, in Gitin, the rabbi said, Lo yachzir, should not take her back. The husband should not take her back. And if he does, also yotzi. So it's the same thing, even though it's talking about two different people, it's the same principle. But we end the discussion and say, Velohi, it's not the same principle. Hatam alume alemeh lekala. Hacha amdinan kam be bekala velete. Over there, in the case of the adult, in our case, in Yevamot, of the adulterer, if the adulterer marries the suspected adulteress, then that will only confirm the rumor. While they were married, everyone said, "Oh, I think she is having an affair with the tennis instructor, right?" And then she goes and marries the tennis instructor. Everybody says, "Oh, see, it was true all along." So there, you have to make them separate. There's more reason to. On the other hand, with the original husband himself, if he divorces her and takes her back, that's the opposite. That shows that he looked into it and he said, you know what? Those rumors weren't true. I divorced my wife because I was so jealous, but it wasn't true. And I want to take her back. So by taking her back, it actually quells the rumors. And therefore, it's a completely different case. And so therefore, you can't compare our case to that one. In our case, where the adulterer is marrying her, then marries her against the law, he has to divorce her. That's no good. But if it's the original husband, although he may not remarry her, nevertheless, if he does, there's no proof from here that he would have to divorce her. All right, and now the next Mishnah. So someone brings a get. He's a messenger to bring the get to the woman. And if he brings it from out of Israel, he has to also testify and say, I saw it in front of me, it was written, and in front of me, it was signed. The reason is because the people outside of Israel are not all proficient in the details of the laws of how to write a get and how it has to be written for lishma and lishma, for the sake of this couple and for no others. And so we need not only the physical paper, but also one witness is sufficient for this to testify and says, yes, it was written properly. If the get is written in Israel, then you don't need anyone to say anything. You still need someone to deliver it, but he doesn't have to say anything as a witness. Okay, now, so usually you'd send it with some guy. Now, in this case, the person who comes to deliver the get to the woman, what if he himself wants to marry that woman? Because now she's divorced, right? He has a get, she has a get, he gave it to her. as a messenger for the husband. And now, can he marry her? And the answer is lo yisa'et ishto. He cannot be the one to do that because he's suspicious. Maybe he's lying and he did not actually see the proper writing of the get, and he's lying and saying he did because he has ulterior motives. He wants to marry her, so he cannot marry her. Okay, another case. Met haragtiv haragnuhu lo yisa et ishto. If a witness comes and says, your husband died, or he says, I killed your husband, or he says, we killed your husband, me and a group. And then that guy, for purposes of remarriage, we allow even one witness, right, to say that the husband died. In this case, that one witness wants to come and marry her. Imagine such a thing. He says, listen, I killed your husband. Can I marry you? Let's say she agrees and she wants to. Maybe she didn't like him, whatever. But the point is, can we trust his testimony? If he gets benefit from it now, the answer is no. Lo yisa'et ishto, he cannot marry her. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda omer haraktiv lo tinaseh ishto. Rabbi Yehuda says is even more stringent. He says that if the witness says, I killed your husband, then she cannot get married at all. We throw out his testimony. This guy's a rasha. How could, if he just admitted to murder, how can you trust him to be a witness? So forget about it. She cannot marry anybody. We have to assume the husband is still alive. However, if he said haragnuhu tinaseh ishto, if he said we killed her, so then it's not clear that he himself was the one with the knife. Maybe he was just part of a group that killed her. And he's not a rasha. And in that case, even if he can't marry her, but she can be married to others, we accept his testimony. Okay, very good. So that is the machloket. And now we ask, the only reason in the first case that we do not trust him is because he came from outside of Israel, and we rely on his testimony to say, I saw it written properly. But let's say he brought the get was written in Eretz Yisrael. And in that case, you don't need a witness to say it was written properly. And we're not relying on him. He's just happened to be carrying it to bring it to her. So in that case, since we don't rely on his testimony, it should be that he is permitted to marry her. Okay, so that seems like a common sense inference from the Mishnah. But it seems to contradict the case of when the witness says, I saw your husband dead. In that case, also, we're not actually relying on his testimony. After all, we don't generally rely on one witness. The reason why we believe him is because once he says, I saw your husband dead, we assume that she will go and do her own investigation and make sure that it's true before she remarries, because she's kind of remarrying at her own risk. If the husband is actually alive, then she's going to be in big trouble as an adulterer in Kizu Mibam Zerim. So we give permission. It's actually a leniency to say, listen, we'll let you rely on one witness because we know that you are going to check it out yourself. So in that case, also, we're not actually relying on the testimony of one witness, but rather on her investigation. And yet in that case, the Mishnah says, the one witness may not marry her. But what's the difference between bringing a get from Eretz Yisrael, where we do allow him to marry because we're not relying on his testimony, and the case of where he says, I saw your husband dead, where also we're not relying on his testimony and we don't allow him to marry? And the answer is hatam leka ketaba. And the answer, when he says, I saw your husband dead, there is no written document. Hachaika ketaba. Whereas when he brings a get, the get speaks for itself. So the get is itself. It's like two witnesses that are signed are like, hey, we're here, and yes, we testify for it. So there's something more here. Ditnan ma ben get lemita shaketav mochiach, and we can prove this from a Mishnah that comes much later on in Masechet Yevamot. It's an interesting case. The case there is certain relatives of a woman are not believed to say the husband died, like co-wives, right? If a man has two wives, one of the wives comes, the guy went on a trip and he's not around. One of the wives comes to the court and says, oh, my husband died. Can her co-wife rely on that to get remarried? We say no, because the wife who testified, they probably hate each other. And so the wife that testified is trying to trip her up and make her co-wife rely on testimony that the husband dead and go get remarried. Then when the husband actually comes back, she'll be an adulterer and she'll have to leave. And then the one who testified will be the lone wife. So we do not rely on such people to say that the husband, our husband died. But if she would bring a get from, if that one of the wives would bring a get and say, oh yeah, our husband brought a get for you, right? And she's the one to deliver it. Even though she may have bad intentions, it's okay. We believe her because she's bringing a get. She didn't forge it. We don't assume, right? That it is signed, and therefore we do trust the get. And so you see that from there that having a get is more reliable than testimony that a person died. Good. Met hadaktiv hadagnuhu lo yisa et ishto. Okay, the Mishnah, back to the Mishnah that said these three cases where the testimony said, the witness said, he's dead, I killed him, we killed him, he cannot marry her. We can infer from this that only the witness himself cannot marry her, but we do believe his testimony for anyone else, right? So we do believe that the husband is dead. He just can't benefit from it. We don't believe it for himself because he's nogea badavar. Okay, so he is believed. Now, challenge to that. V'hamad Rav Yosef, Peloni deba'ani le'onsi, hu ve'ached mistarfin lehorgo. Okay, listen to this case. It's not talking about a get, but a different case of someone comes and testifies, this man raped me, right? Homosexual rape. And there's another witness to the act, then they can come together to give capital punishment to the rapist. Okay, so the victim can be can testify. That's an easy case. Lirsoni rashahu v'Torah amera al tashet yadecha im rasha liot et Hamas. However, if the witness comes and says, I had consensual sex with this man, then we do not believe him, because then he is admitting to a crime and we call him a rasha. And the Torah says, do not testify with an evildoer. And therefore, we throw out his testimony and we do not punish the other man that he claimed was with him. Okay, so you see that we throw out testimony of someone who is a rasha. And therefore, if someone says, I murdered your husband, right? We should not only disbelieve him for himself, we should disbelieve him altogether for anyone. And she should not be able to marry anyone. So that's the contradiction. How come the Mishnah says that when he says, I killed your husband, she can marry others? Whereas in this case, where he says, I had consensual relations, we throw him out and we do not believe him at all. And maybe you'll say, oh, it's different. When it comes to allowing a woman to get married, then the rabbis are very lenient. They accept one witness, they accept a woman, and they'll accept someone even if he says, I am a murderer, right? We'll accept it because we don't want a person to be an aguna. Maybe the guy died overseas and is not going to come back, and she's going to be aguna the rest of her life. So the rabbis are lenient, whereas there's no need to be lenient regarding this guy who says I had consensual sex. So that maybe that you would answer that. Veha amar Rav Menashe, Gazlan de divrehem kasher le'edut isha. Gazlan de divrei Torah pasul le'edut isha. Rav Menashe would not agree to this. Because he says that although the rabbis are lenient regarding a testimony that a man is dead so a woman can get remarried, they're only lenient regarding a dirabanan problem. If someone is a thief midirabanan, for example, he's a gambler, and so the rabbis say, gambling, you're not a responsible person if you're gambling. People, lose when they're gambling. They don't really feel like they should give you their money. And so they feel like they didn't actually give you the money and you're taking it. So this is gazlan. This is a thief midrabanan. So that the rabbi said, okay, we'll be lenient, even though generally that person is not acceptable, is an invalid witness. If he says, I saw your husband dead, we accept it. But if someone is a gazlan from the Torah, the Rabbanan, a full-out thief, or a full-out criminal mid-deoraita, then he's pasul edut even for edut isha. So therefore, according to Rab Menashe, we could not accept that there's a difference between testimony for a woman and any other kind of testimony. So what are you going to do with that? With Rab Menashe? So we answer, I know, maybe Rab Menashe, who says we are strict regarding edut isha deoraita, maybe he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah said that if he says, I am a murderer, then we throw out his testimony and she cannot marry anyone. Well, that would make sense because that would be pasul edut deoraita. And so maybe Rabbi Menashe follows Rabbi Yehuda, and Rav Yosef here could say that in fact we are more mekel regarding a woman, even if it's a doraita case. And so he doesn't have to agree with Rabbi Menashe. So Rav Yosef can be like Rabbanan in our Mishnah. So this is a possible answer. But the Gemara, we don't like to box Amoraim into having to agree with one Tana only. So Malach Rabbi Menashe can get out of it and say, Ana damari afilu Rabbanan. I agree even with Rabbanan that she can marry others. When he says, when the guy comes and says, I murdered your husband, she can get married to others, not just not to the witness. And the reason I say so is not because we're lenient regarding testimony for women. We're not lenient in a doraita, but rather for a different reason. I follow the opinion of Rava, who argues with Rav Yosef. Would argue in the rape case with Rav Yosef. Rava, Adam karov esel asmo, ben Adam mesim asmo rasha. Rava says that we can accept half of a application of a testimony. If someone says, let's say in that case where he says, I was with this man consensually, then we assume a person is related to himself, and a person is not going to admit that he did wrong and make himself evil, and therefore the person is not considered a rasha, and so his testimony is accepted to the extent that we believe that the other guy he was with is guilty, which is really strange. It's a kind of a paradox, right? So we believe that the other guy is guilty. We don't believe that the guy who testified is guilty, even though in order for anyone to be liable, they had to be together, right? And both had to be involved in the sin. But that's Rava's point, right? That we can, it's like a self-incrimination we don't allow self-incrimination. So he, for the witness, for himself, is not believed that he did anything wrong, and so we accept his test. So therefore, he's a kosher witness, and he's a kosher witness, so he is believed to say that the other guy sinned. And so it's possible to split the difference, and that's how Menashe can explain our case as well. When a man comes and says, I killed your husband, we do not throw out the testimony because we don't believe someone who self-incriminates. And so we're not going to believe him to say he actually did the murder. But we do believe him to the extent that the husband is dead. And so therefore she can go ahead and marry other people. He can't marry her because even if he said, I saw him dead, someone else killed him, we still wouldn't allow him to marry because he's suspicious. But we do accept this testimony for others, and that's how Rav Menashe could agree with Rava, and that's how he can explain the case of our Mishnah. Okay, good. Now, Lema Rav Yosef Damar Kerebi Yehuda. So now maybe it's Rav Yosef who said that he disagreed with Rava. Rav Yosef is the one that said that once a person says, "Oh, it was consensual. I was there with him," we call him a rasha. We throw out the case. So in that case, and therefore in our case also, if a person says, I'm the one that murdered your husband, so he's a rasha, and we should throw out his testimony altogether. And that would fit with Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the murderer, in the case of murderer, she may not remarry anyone at all, because we assume he's a rasha. So now it's Rav Yosef that is being pigeonholed into the agree with Rabbi Yehuda. The opposite of what we said before. So, but we don't want that either. We can answer, Malach Rav Yosef, Ana damri afilu Rabbanan. No, I can agree with Rabbanan. V'shana edut isha dakilu by Rabbanan. And I would say that when it comes to testimony about a woman, there the rabbis are lenient and they say, "Oh, we will accept your testimony, even though you just said you are a rasha, because we can't let this woman be an aguna." So in that case, I would agree that she can remarry others, just not the witness that says, I killed your husband himself. And then Rav Yosef would say, no, it's Rav Menashe. He's the one that says like Rabbi Yehuda. So each of these two Amoraim, Rav Yosef and Rav Menashe, will say, I can follow Rabbanan. You're the one like that's like Rabbi Yehuda. And the other one will say the opposite. But they both have good logical explanations for their opinions. All right, excellent. Now, haragtiv, haragnuhu tinaseh. Regarding Rabbi Yehuda, he says there's a difference. But if a witness says, I killed your husband, she cannot remarry anyone. We throw out that testimony. If he says, we killed your husband, then she can go and marry others. We ask, what's the difference if you say, I killed him or we killed him? Right? You're still involved. When he says we killed him, what he means is that I was together with a group when someone killed him, right? I was part of a gang, and someone in the gang killed your husband. I saw it, right? But I wasn't. It means that he was not the one himself who actually killed her, and therefore he himself is not a criminal. Now we ask about that from a story. מעשה בליסטים אחד שיעשה להרג במגיזת כפות-קייה. ואמר להם, לכו אמרו לה לאשת שמעון בן כהן, אני הרגתי את בעלה בכניסתי ללוד. Okay, so the story about the certain bandit who was taken to be executed, capital punishment, in Cappadocia, here in Turkey, by the non-Jewish government. He was found to be guilty, and they're taking him to the gallows. On his way, he wants to help someone out, right? Like sometimes after someone's already convicted of capital punishment, we say, okay, tell us who else you killed and where they're buried. So you're killing you anyway. So, at least be helpful. So he says, while he's being taken out to be killed, he says, listen, go tell the wife of Shimon ben Kohen that I killed her husband, right? I feel bad, and I want her to be able to get remarried. And, I hid her body. I hid his body. No one found it. So I killed him when I was going into Lod. Another version is when he was going into Lod down in Israel. That's where I did the murder. And the rabbis believed him. The rabbi said, based on that testimony of this convicted felon murderer being about to be killed, they said, oh, yes, she can go and marry. And so this is a question, because this would be a case where he himself said, I killed your husband, and now we believed him for others, that she could go and marry someone else. Amar lahem. So Rabbi Yehuda said, are you bringing a proof from that story against me? No, that was a case where he didn't say I killed him. He says I was with a group of mafiosos and we killed him. Okay, so he didn't himself kill him. That's why you believe him. So it's more of a case of haragnuhu, we killed him. Wait a second, but it calls him a bandit, right? It calls him a thug. So he's a rasha, isn't he? No, it means he was arrested for being a thug, but he was never convicted necessarily. We don't know if he's guilty. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hold on, but they took him to be killed as capital punishment. So it must be that he is in fact guilty. And we answer, Rabbi Yehuda answers, no, he was killed in a non-Jewish court. The non-Jewish court, they rounded them all up, everyone who was there, and they killed them all. And they weren't so careful, so precise to say, which one of you actually did the stabbing, which one of you did this, which one did that, which one was a bystander. They just killed them all. And therefore, it's not necessarily true that this guy was himself a murderer or even a rasha, and that's why the rabbis believed him. All right, interesting story. Okay, and now we get to the next Mishnah. Hechacham she'asar et ha'isha beneder al ba'ala, hareh lo yisa'enna. Let's say there's a couple and she makes a vow and says, I'm not going to shower. I'm not going to serve you. I refuse any benefit from you. And he doesn't undo the vow within a day. And then they go to a chacham, to undo the vow. And the Chacham looks into it and says, sorry, I cannot undo this vow. There's various laws of when you can undo, when you cannot undo a vow. And he, asad et haisha, he bound her to that vow that she made against her husband. And he says, I can't live like this. I don't want to live with her. And he divorces her. Now she's a single woman. Can that Chacham himself marry her? The answer is no, because we're suspicious. Maybe he had ulterior motives and he made sure not to undo the vow so that the husband would divorce her so that the Chacham could marry her. Or even if we don't suspect the Chacham of doing that, it will cause a rumor for people to say that, and we should stay away from anything that looks suspicious. That's case one. Case two, me'ana o shechalsa b'fanav yisa'ena mipnei shehu bet din. If you have a girl whose family married her off, or that she did halisa, and in front of a certain chacham, and the chacham has to be there with a betin to certify that she said, I don't want to be married anymore to this adult when she's young, or a Yevamot who does chalitza in front of him, and now both of these women would be single. Can they marry this chacham? And the answer is yes. The chacham can go ahead and marry any of these cases, because in this cases it's a bet din that does it, and the bet din is made up of three people, and so it's not all three people. The other two are going to make sure that there's no suspicion that it's on the up and up. I would add further reason that in these cases they're just testifying. The bet din is there not to decide anything; they're just there to do the ceremony. Right? You need a bet din for the ceremony to be valid. But they're not. It's not their decision making to say, "Oh, is this should you do chalisa or not?" So it's really it's not about the subjective judgment. Okay, but the Gemara is going to ask about this. Is it about the case or about the fact that there's a bet din present? Okay, so Gemara v'ha hittida yisa'ena b'mai askinan. So let's say a case where the chacham came. In the same case, and she took a vow, and the husband says, "Oh, I don't like this vow," and that they come to the chacham. And what if the case was the chacham said, "Mutarim lachem, mutarim lachem"? Yes, you undo the vow. And let's say afterwards they get divorced or the husband dies in any case, and now she's single. Well, in that case, the chacham should be able to marry her, right? Okay, so b'maiskinan, what are the particulars of the case? Now, if he's the only one, only judge there, can one single judge do hatarat nedarim? V'amar Rav Amar Bichia Bar Avin Amar Rav Amram Tana hatarat nedarim b'shlosha. We learned that hatarat nedarim has to have three judges at least. So it can't be that he's alone. But if he's with three, then he shouldn't be suspected at all. And the Sefer of the Mishnah says, if you do mi'un or chalitza, then that chacham, the chacham can marry her because he's on a betin. And if you're one of three on a betin, then even if you're the cause for her to be single, you're still allowed to marry her because you're on a betin, and so too in the case of hatan hadarim. So it shouldn't matter what the reason is that she is single. If your fact that you're on a betin should be enough. So now that question back to the Resha, what are you talking about? Le'olam bechad, and we say no. In fact, it's one judge. We learn in Masechet Sanhedrin that a single judge, if he's an expert, can judge on his own, right? He's so expert that he doesn't need the other two. We can trust him. And so if you're talking about such a case where a single judge is deciding about the vow, then if he says the vow sticks and caused the husband to divorce her, then that's too suspicious and we do not allow him. But if in fact it was with a betin, then that would be okay. Next case, it seems here that the reason why we allow one of the judges who witnessed a mi'un or the chalitza to marry her afterwards is because he's with a betin of three. There's two others. Independently, the two could decide to make her free, even if he voted against them. even though actually there's no voting in Chalisa Mi'un. So you have the other two that are the majority in any case. But we can infer from the Sefer of the Mishnah that if there's only two people, then either one of the two people would not be able to marry her and benefit from their help in making her single. Now, but this would contradict what we learned in the following Tannaitic source that says, "Aidim hatumim al sedeh mikach v'al get isha lo chashu chachamim ladavar." If you have two witnesses, right? You see, three would be for a bet din, but in this case, these are two witnesses that are signing a contract or a contract for a land sale or a get, and then after they do that, one of these witnesses wants to buy that very land or wants to marry that woman who was just divorced. And the rabbi said, it's okay, they didn't worry about this because they're just signatories on the get, right? It's not like they convinced them or judged the case that this has to be like this or not. Okay, so now we have a contradiction because we just said that we believe one of three, but not one of two. But here, this Mishnah says we do believe one of two, and above suspicion, then they can go ahead and marry. The first case said we suspect one of two. Here it says we don't suspect one of two. He gufa kamashmalan, and we answer that our Mishnah itself is coming to teach us this very law. It's coming. The Mishnah tells us that there's three in the bet din in order to teach us that when a minor wants to object to her marriage that she was put into, you have to have three there. That's why it says three in our Mishnah. But you're right. In a case where there was only two, and then the two helped get divorced, one of the two would be able to marry her and is acceptable. Okay. And last question. Kanas mahu sheyosi. What if in these cases that judge who was not supposed to marry her, the judge who blocked the neded goes ahead and is not supposed to marry her, but let's say he does anyway. Does the bet din have to force him to divorce? Rav Kana Amar Kanas Mosi. Rav Kana stringent says yes, must get divorced. Rav Ashi Amar Kanas Eno Mosi. Rav Ashi says no. If he should b'di abad, they can stay married. Taneh lehu Rav Zuti debe Rav Papi kededebe haomer Kanas Eno Mosi. So Rav Zuti from the house of the Papi has a beraita supporting Rav Ashi who is lenient and says they can stay together. So now the rabbis answer Vashe. When you said you can be lenient and stay together, was that based on a tradition? In fact, we have a tradition here after that's brought. We don't know if Rav Vashe knew this tradition, this baraita. Was it based on tradition or was it based on your own reason? Are you kidding? I have a Mishnah. It's our very Mishnah. From above. If someone is suspected of something even worse, to be with a shivcha or with a non-Jew, they cannot marry. But if they do marry, then we do not force them to leave. So you see that based on a rumor only, we do not force the couple to divorce, and so too here with a witness or a judge, where they didn't do anything bad. There's just a rumor may circulate because of it, so we prohibit this judge from marrying. But if he does, then with such a rumor is not sufficient grounds to force them to get divorced, and that's a proof. For Rav Ashi, that's how Rav Ashi figured it out, that in this case they can remain married. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.